Welcome back. I decided it was time for another episode of Turn Talk. Why? Well, there's been a lot of discussion, some in jest, some not, some heated, some civil, on carbide, as some would say, versus traditional turning tools. I'm not going to title this one Carbide versus Traditional, or Traditional versus Carbide. That's not the point, and it's not necessary. And let me explain why. Now, first off, let me also say, this is my opinion, how I do things, how I deal with things, and the way I see things based on the experience that I've got. I'm not going to stand here and say, oh, one is better than the other. What I'm going to do is tell you how each one operates and why I use it, the way I use it, and where I use it. A lot of turners will tell you carbides don't cut, they scrape. Traditional tools will cut. And that's true, it's very true. What they don't tell you is why. Well, that's what I'm going to show you right now. Look at the edge on this bowl gouge. Look at the angles that it's ground to. When this is introduced to a piece of wood, because of the angle that it's ground to and the angle that it's introduced at, it produces a cut, a very particular cut. If you're doing it right, it's a shearing cut. And that shearing cut slices through the fibers and lays them down. The same thing with a skew. Look at the angle that's ground to. When it's introduced to a piece of wood at the right angle, it shears the fibers and lays them down. It does a shearing cut. Yes, you can also use this tool as a negative rake scraper. And we're going to talk about scrapers in a second. Even this ugly old roughing gouge, look at the angle that's ground to. That will produce a shearing cut when it's introduced across the fibers correctly, and it will lay them down. Why all this importance on laying the fibers down? And why does everybody keep saying, make sure you're cutting downhill instead of uphill? It's pretty simple, really. Your fibers are like this. Let's say you're cutting the outside of a bowl. The fibers in the bowl and the piece that you're turning are running largely this direction. If you cut this way, what happens? You're pushing those fibers apart and you're tearing them. That's cutting uphill, and that cut is not supported. Not supported why? Because as you come up here, there's nothing to support all of these other fibers from tearing out. So if I'm going this direction and I'm cutting downhill, then these fibers are supported by each other as I make the cut. That's what's meant by unsupported versus supported cut, and that's also what's meant by cutting uphill or downhill. And the same holds true for spindles. A spindle is sitting on your lathe like this and spinning this way. If you've got a particular shape and it goes that way, well, now you got fibers that are cut off, and you want to cut more off, you want to cut downhill, so your fibers are supported. So where do carbides come in? If you look at the angle that this carbide is ground to, it's not nearly as acute as the angles on the skew or the bowl gouge or even the roughing gouge. Acute meaning steep. It actually looks more like the angle that this scraper is ground to. I have converted it to a negative rake scraper. What's meant by negative rake is that I've just ground this flat off here so that it's at a downward slope. So when I introduce the tool at the center line, it's not making quite as aggressive a cut. Scrapers, in spite of our best efforts, don't cut. They scrape. Whether it be this one or this one, doesn't matter. They're scrapers. Can you turn with a scraper? Absolutely. I've done it 100 times. 100 times. I've done it hundreds of times. There are times I've turned a particular species of wood on a pen using nothing but a scraper. Why? Because it was, in this one instance, it was a piece of really curly koa, and it didn't matter what I did, it wanted to tear out. So I found that I got my best cut on that particular koa taking very, very light scrapes with it. The other alternative would have been to use what some people refer to as a 60 or 80 grit gouge. In other words, coarse sandpaper. That's always a way down the hill fallback for me. Now, does that mean you don't have to follow the uphill downhill thing with scrapers? No, not at all. In fact, you're going to get your best scraping results if you stay to that uphill downhill unsupported supported fiber regime. That's just part of turning and learning to turn. And that comes with experience. You're not going to pick it up overnight. Yes, a lot of new turners love carbides. Why? Because they can turn quickly. They don't have to learn how to cut. They don't have to learn how to sharpen a bowl gouge or a skew. They don't have to learn how to properly approach the wood. All they have to do is take the tool, stick it to the wood, and get after it and start making a shape. Are there benefits to that? Yeah. But there's a lot of drawbacks too. More sanding, longer time sanding. When I'm turning a pen, for example, with a skew or even one of my good spindle gouges, more often than not, I'll start sanding at 220 grit because I get that good a cut. You're never going to achieve that with a scraper or with a carbide, ever. Are there times that carbide is the way to go? Oh, absolutely. Anytime that you need a scraper to do the work, a carbide is a good choice. In one of my recent videos, the collab video with Jen's woodworking and things, that bowl she sent me to work on, you saw I had to resort to this tool right here because resins love scrapers. If you are experienced with skews and bowl gouges and spindle gouges, you can turn resin. It takes a soft touch. You have to understand where your cutting edge is and how you're introducing it, because resins love to chip. If you hear a chattering when you're cutting, you're not shearing that resin, you're blowing out chunks. They might be really, really small, but you're blowing out chunks. If you hear a solid, steady and it's throwing off ribbons, you're cutting the resin the right way. That's where carbides excel, and that's why I keep one on hand all the time. If you look real closely at the edge of this one, I turned it around since I did Jen's bowl, but I don't know if you can see that or not, but I actually chipped part of that carbide out on that bowl. So that's why I decided to call this traditional or carbide rather than traditional versus carbide, because there really isn't a there really isn't a versus thing. It's not an argument. It's not a me versus you. It's a what tool is best for the job. Now, if you're a new turner, what tool is best for you? The one that you can work with the best, actually. Does that mean if the carbides are working well, you don't need to learn how to use a traditional tool? See, that's where opinion comes into play. That choice is yours. If you choose to stay with carbides and you like spending that much time sanding, then no, you don't need to learn traditional tools at all. If you plan on really excelling at the turning thing, you need to learn traditional tools. That's just all there is to it. Why? Better cut. Better cut means less sanding. Less sanding means less time producing. And if you are selling your work Time is money. It's that simple. If you don't care and you're giving all your stuff away, stay with carbides. Your choice. Thanks for watching. I hope this has helped somebody. That's the only reason I'm doing it. I'm not doing it to stir up crap, and I'm not doing it to cause a kerfluffle, and I know it's going to anyway. But always remember, your mileage may vary. Thanks for watching. Y'all come back.